Колеги, я перепрошую за
We are sorry for the delay. We were waiting for the information from the east of Ukraine, and now Colonel Lysenko is ready to share the information on ATO zone activities. Good afternoon.
Dear colleagues. The terrorists and Russian troops continue systematically to violate the conditions of Minsk agreements and inflict shelling and firing on the units of the Ukrainian armed forces. Our military are conducting active defense, and they repel the attacks successfully, and also they liquidate the armed forces of the enemy. Over the last 24 hours, there are no killed among the Ukrainian military. One military person was wounded. Over the last day, the Ukrainian armed forces positions were shelled upon 6 times from grenade launchers. In the vicinity of Mariupol, our positions next to the villages of Gnutov and Chernenko were fired upon from mortars, and also from Grad batteries and tanks next to Pavlopol. In Volnovakha district, by this village of Mykolaievka, the terrorists twice shelled our military from artillery, and next to the village of Berezove, from mortars and tanks. Next to the settlement Chernukhin, our military have repelled the attack of terrorists, and the militants sustained losses and retreated. There's the rise in activity of militants and Russian troops on the eve of the so-called elections that the terrorists plan to organize on the 2nd of November. There's the relocation of Russian units from Rostov region to the vicinity of Donetsk and to the south of the region. The Russians have got the order to surrender all their personal belongings, including insignia and documents. 2 convoys of machinery and personnel arrived with Cossack uniform. The reconnaissance and intelligence data says that on the 2nd of November, the territory is controlled by militants, first of all in the city of Donetsk and its outskirts. They prepare a series of large-scale provocations with casualties. The tanks of the militants are marked and signed on as National Guards and as armed forces of Ukraine. The gangs have commissioned the over 3,000 units of Ukrainian uniform, and the territories which are not controlled by the Ukrainian forces are being stuffed with the journalists of the Russian media to cover the so-called elections on the 2nd and 9th of November. Now you see the gang Oplot and Vostok who are who are in conflict between each others. So, of course, if the militants are so engaged in mutual conflicts, you can get this video after the briefing from us. We have to warn the citizens that their participation in the so-called elections may be dangerous for their lives, as there is a high probability of terrorist acts where the voting will be taking place. Over the last 24 hours, there were no clashes with Russian subversive groups outside the boundaries of the anti-terrorist operation. However, there are some facts of active air reconnaissance on the border. Yesterday, a flight of the helicopter Mi-24 of Russian armed forces was detected, and also twice we detected the use of drones next to Sartana in the vicinity of Mariupol and at the Chervony Chaban border point. The law enforcers try to conduct measures on non-allowing the terrorists on the territories outside the boundaries of the anti-terrorist operation. Yesterday in Donetsk region, a citizen of Ukraine was detained who had a ID from the so-called DNR with inscriptions self-defense and artillery. He was handed over to counterintelligence. Next to Mariupol, the bodyguards have detected Deyulana's car driven by a citizen of Ukraine, and in the car boot they found the second set of license plates and $10,000 of US dollars. And this over the last 24 hours, 3 tanks and 2 IFVs and APCs were repaired. In Donetsk yesterday, the terrorists have shelled from artillery Kuybashevsky and Kievsky districts. As a result, a house was ruined and 1 peaceful resident died. Yesterday, the electric station was returned to order. As a result, over 5,000 customers in Kiev district started to get electricity again. Also, they continue to repair and replace the electricity lines damaged as a result of combat actions. At the moment, there's no electricity in Trudivske village of Petrovsky district and in 70 high-rise blocks in 1,500 private houses of the settlement Zhovtnevi in Kuybashevsky district. In Luhansk region, the militants' representatives are sending out the instructions to local self-government bodies using the blanks of forms of the district state administration. One of the letters, for instance, say that they have to re-register the enterprises of any form of ownership. There are no authority with the so-called executive bodies of terrorists on the occupied territories. After the occupied territories are liberated, then all the self-proclaimed leaders will face Ukrainian judgment. 530 persons, including 141 child and 143 disabled and old people, were resettled over the last 24 hours from the anti-terrorist operation zone. In general, over the period of anti-terrorist operation, 387,683 people were resettled, including 117,945 kids and almost 80,000 disabled people and old people. Over the last 24 hours, the SSES, State Service of Emergency Situations of Ukraine, detected and defused 81 units of ammunition, including 43 artillery shells, 3 mortar mines, 7 grenades, and so on. From the start of this work, from the 6th of July, 25,772 units of munitions were detected and defused. The psychologists of the State Security Emergency Service of Ukraine, together with volunteers and public organizations, are providing psychological help. And yesterday they provided it to 681 persons, including 190 children. And as of the 28th of October, in the families of displaced persons from Crimea and Donbass, 975 babies were born, including 102 babies who were born to women from the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol. Most of them were born in Kyiv, 25, in the Lviv region, 16, Vinnytsia, 9, and Mykolaiv, 7. And 873 babies were born to the families that were displaced from Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and including 83 people and 83 babies who were born in Kyiv, in Poltava region, 96, and 315 babies were born to the families who were displaced from Luhansk region, including 126 people in Kyiv. During the meeting of Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko with the co-head of the Armaments Committee of the Senate of U.S., James Inhofe, the Ukrainian head of state said that pseudo-elections that are designated to happen in the so-called DNR and LNR on the beginning of November don't have anything in common with the Minsk Protocol, and also they contradicted brutally and pose under threat the entire peace process. The president of France, François Hollande, during his telephone talk to Petro Poroshenko, emphasized that pseudo-elections planned for the 2nd of November in Donbass contradict the Minsk agreements that were recognized by all sides, including Russia. So the president of France suggested that the search for setting up this problem goes on in a multilateral format, and the concern of the plans of separatists were also voiced by the State Secretary of the U.S., John Kerry, Prime Minister of UK, David Cameron, and François Hollande. John Kerry said that the U.S. and the international community will not recognize the elections of separatists until they are conducted within the framework of the special law on the status adopted by the Ukrainian parliament and signed by the president of Ukraine. David Cameron said that any elections organized by pro-Russian separatists in the so-called DNR-LNR contradict Minsk agreements and will not be recognized by the official London. The Foreign Ministry of Ukraine, in their statement about the sayings of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Russia, Mr. Lavrov, about the intention of the Russian side to recognize the results of elections in Donbass, has emphasized that the recognition of legitimacy of any other elections will for sure cross out the logics of Minsk agreements and will testify to the non-observance by the Russian side of their obligations in the realization of initiatives on establishing peace in Donbass. The Minister for Defense of France, Jean-Yves Le Drian, said that France will postpone until November the decision to deliver the vessel Mistral to Russian Federation because of the unstable political situation in the east of Ukraine. The Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine said that the Russian Federation had not sent official documents to the Ukrainian side about the and not about another so-called humanitarian convoy. We again call upon Russia to stick to international norms that stipulate the procedure of sending humanitarian help. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine sent a note of protest to Russia in connection with the continuation of the term of custody for Nadia Savchenko.
The terrorists disseminate the information that Ukrainian side canceled their signature under the agreements about the buffer zone on the border with the terrorists. Why are they disseminating such statements? And what is the strategy of Ukraine about that? Is Ukraine planning to create the buffer zone? Is Ukraine going to follow the defense strategy? And are we planning to continue defense of Donetsk airport? It is impossible to remove what has not been there. The Minsk agreements, which started on the 5th of September, do not provide for changes of the territory or either withdrawal or leaving the settlements which were occupied by the sides at the time when the protocol was signed. We believe that such statements of the leaders of so-called the DNR and LNR are provocative, and their objective is to deceive international community and also to follow the way of canceling Minsk agreements and also holding the so-called referendum, which is planned for the beginning to take place in the beginning of November this year in Donbass. Donetsk airport has been and will be under the control of Ukrainian armed forces. And thirdly, the line which has not been approved, but we still have the checkpoints and strongholds of Ukrainian troops. They are there according to Minsk agreements. That's all effective, and we'll be doing everything for it to be implemented, especially item 1, which talks about ceasefire to be implemented. We'll be insisting on all the agreements to be implemented, and we'll do everything so that Russian side and another side, which is fighting against us, following it. But how does the National Security and Defense Council plan to achieve once it's not done? We involve diplomatic channels. There are many mechanisms. And the cooperation with the international community and also negotiations with Russian side. You know that several times the president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, had several phone calls and talked to the president of Russian Federation. Every day he does everything possible so that the ceasefire regime is fully observed, and we'll do everything so that the situation is quiet and the agreements achieved in Minsk, which are signed by the ambassador of Russian Federation, so that these agreements are implemented. And the question about checkpoint 32 and the neighboring checkpoints. But there are the neighboring 29 and 31 checkpoints there. What was done to enforce these checkpoints? What is done so that they are not encircled by checkpoint 32? Today, checkpoints 31 and 29, they are in the zone of special attention of Ukrainian leadership. We can say that at checkpoint 32 there were representatives of different law enforcement bodies, and we do not have final data on people who are missing. We are trying to find these guys and get them back home. As to other checkpoints, I can state that not only number 29 and 31, which are at the front line, at this line of delineation, there are many checkpoints which are sheltered. All of them are in equal conditions, and Ukrainian commandership is doing everything so that our servicemen feel that they are not forgotten. They receive everything to be able to execute their military tasks. And I would like to address our mass media. First of all, we thank you for following the events at the front line. We respect you because our volunteers, they are really brave people and they are at the front line and they help our servicemen. I would like to thank our servicemen who are holding the defense and they understand the task which they have. That is why I would like to thank you again for understanding and for quick reaction and for specifying the facts which get to the information space. We analyze the information space and social media about Checkpoint 32. That was most probably the situation which was especially covered by Russian side. First, there was an information attack. That checkpoint for a month and a half was there, and no one was mentioning it. The guys were semi-encircled, but when there was a command issued to make it the second Ilovaisk, and that order was sent to Ukraine by our enemy. We need to understand that we need to be united. We need to help each other without accusations. If there are any problems, if there is something that requires to be changed, I would like to thank you for your suggestion. So there were no special works done on checkpoints 32 and others. Yes, there were some works done. We cannot tell you what else will be done to reinforce them, but there are forces which are sent to reinforce. What has Ukraine lost after liquidation of checkpoint 32? Is it some highway or settlement? The checkpoint is not put in the forest. It's put on a highway, and the highway is of strategic or semi-strategic importance. And to say that checkpoint number 32 is defeated and now we have some big problem there. We cannot say that. But now my question is about the Russian convoy. We have a video when the Russian convoy is on the border with Voronezh region. Can you tell what should be the reaction of our law enforcement bodies when they see this convoy? Is it possible not to let it onto the territory of Ukraine? If you're talking about the convoy, which is in the section of the border which is not controlled by us, then physically we cannot stop it. But this fact is to be disseminated so that the world community sees what's happening. Because the three humanitarian convoys that entered our territory without permits, in contradiction to international law and to Ukrainian legislation, they have not resolved even partially the problems of the region. The humanitarian assistance has not reached local population. Partially it was sold, partially it was used to pay for the works on repairing the equipment of terrorists. And to talk about humanitarian assistance as humanitarian assistance would be wrong. There's a lot of information that these trucks which arrived to the territory of Ukraine as humanitarian assistance, they were used to then take away the equipment from some strategic enterprises to the territory of Russian Federation to bring weapons to terrorists. And these convoys had no meaning as humanitarian assistance. But could anything be done not to allow it. The main thing is to fix it as a fact, to register it as a fact, because there will be time when the situation will be over, the aggression will stop, the territory will be liberated, and the other side will be taken to the court in The Hague, and then we will need these facts. Now the situation doesn't allow us to do anything, but I would like to ensure you that the leadership of the state is doing everything. The prosecutor will come to everyone. You have no information about that convoy. We do have information, but official information, but we do not have any official information from Russian side, and we'll be grateful if you give us some facts. And now the question about shelling of Ukrainian checkpoints. Ukrainian military are firing back. They're not attacking, but why aren't they using the heavy weaponry? Because I know that they are shooting. The terrorists are using the tactic of using this live shield. They are shelling from the territory of settlements, and we cannot fight back because there are some local citizens there. They provoke this way and they shell at Ukrainian positions. But do Ukrainian forces have the heavy weaponry at the checkpoints? Yes, we do have. Any other questions? Interfax Ukraine, do you have any data on the situation in Crimea on the border with the continental part of Ukraine? Is there any regrouping of armed forces there? What is the situation there? There's information that on the territory of Crimea there is a redislocation of some groups of armored equipment and Russian armed forces, but they're not crossing the border with continental part of Ukraine. And we conduct the reconnaissance using the drones. Every day we're controlling that. Any other questions? Once we have no questions, thank you. And tomorrow we will have another